Sarah DeAngelo. I'm a graduate student at Morningside College, seeking my master's degree in special education. I'm also a special education teacher in a self-contained early childhood special education classroom. The title of my research report is Tangible Cues and Classroom Participation in Young Students with Multiple Disabilities. The problem I targeted for my research was a lack of independence in my students. They needed hand-over-hand support or other really intrusive methods of prompting in order to complete daily routines. This signifies a lack of independence in my students, and this is huge for young students. It impacts not only them, but their families, caregivers, and teachers. The underlying problem here is that individuals with severe and profound disabilities are typically pre-symbolic communicators, meaning that they aren't yet cognitively able to make sense of the symbols, such as pictures or words, that we use for communication. Literature shows that tangible symbols can be effective for increasing language in individuals with multiple disabilities, including visual impairment. When done in combination, objects, photos, gestures, simplified language, and touch cues were shown to increase expressive language in 2 out of 2 students and increase receptive language in 1 out of 2 students with multiple disabilities, including visual impairment. Tangible symbols are effective because they're easier to remember and require less representational thinking. They often include a feature of the activity or object they represent, such as texture or shape. An example of this would be using a spoon to signify snack time, because that has a huge role in the actual activity of snack time. Tangible symbols are aimed at providing information about the schedule, teach labeling of activities, and providing opportunities for choice making for students with severe and profound disabilities. Choice making is huge for these students because they don't often have the power to make choices during their day and have control over things during their life. So any choice that we can give them is going to make a huge difference. It has been shown that tangible cues with the most practical relation to the activity they represent are more effective. There are 2 ways we can use these tangible cues. One way is an object schedule, and one way is tangible symbols picture exchange communication system. An object schedule is a way to signal daily activities and events to students who have communication difficulties. And when we use these tangible symbols in picture exchange communication system, we simply replace the pictures we would normally use with objects to signify activities and present them to students as choices so they can indicate what they want to participate in. Crawford and Ogletree lay out some best practices in using tangible symbols with students with severe disabilities. When doing this, we should choose objects that are important or used in frequently occurring routines. These objects should also have unique sensory characteristics, so they're easy to differentiate from one another. We should use these objects repetitively and expose them to students as much as possible to increase their understanding. And procedures around teaching these objects should always be consistent. We also need to watch carefully for student responses to see if they are learning these symbols and are able to use them to anticipate what's coming up next in the schedule. While there is a good research base for tangible symbols, there are holes in the existing research. Research does show us that these tangible symbols are effective for students with multiple disabilities with visual impairments, but it doesn't tell us if this strategy can also be used for learners with multiple disabilities who are not visually impaired. Tangible symbols have an effect on these individuals to communicate and understand, but we don't yet know how that communication and understanding impacts their participation in daily classroom activities. The objectives of my research were to find out if object schedules and tangible symbols PECs would impact the level of prompting needed for student participation. So going off the holes in research, are these tangible symbols effective for students with multiple disabilities who are not visually impaired? And how does that receptive understanding and expressive communication impact their ability to participate in daily activities? To investigate these questions further, I used a baseline intervention research design. I chose this because it clearly shows performance before and during intervention, and it's easy to show progress across a period of time. I used a 3-week baseline when I used a picture schedule and picture exchange communication, followed by 6 weeks of intervention with the object schedule and object exchange communication. The participants were 3 to 5-year-olds with severe and profound or multiple special needs in my classroom. I chose 5 students in my classroom and excluded 3 students, one with autism, one who was visually impaired, and one who had poor attendance. The setting of this research was my classroom, a self-contained early childhood special education classroom serving only level 3 students. I was the only teacher and have 2 paraprofessionals and related service professionals such as the speech pathologist, physical therapist, and occupational therapist were in the room on a daily basis. My classroom is in a special school, meaning we serve only students with disabilities in the school, and we serve students pre-K to 5th grade. This school is in an urban district with a student population of more than 30,000. The treatment procedures included a whole class object schedule in which objects presented different daily activities. I used a piece of carpet to symbolize large group time, a stacking toy to symbolize small group table time, a spoon for snack time, a bouncy ball for recess, a small doll for one-on-one teacher work time, as well as the object pecs, which symbolize different play activities. In the whole class object schedule, object symbols were shown to and felt by students directly before and after transitions and were accompanied by verbal labeling of a transition by adults. An example of this would be before we were transitioning to large group time, I would show the student the object symbol, help them feel it, and then say, we are going to large group time. I would then help the student to transition. After the transition, I would show the student the object, help them feel it, and say, we are at large group time. I then collected data on the level of prompting needed for students to complete the first 3 demands of the activity, whatever those demands may be. And instruction always followed the system of least prompts. We also used tangible pecs to choose play activities in which objects represented the activities available for choice. They were presented in arrays of 3 to 5, and similar to the object schedule, an adult showed the student the choices and verbally listed them and helped the students feel them or pointed to them. And a student used eye gaze, touch, or exchange of the symbol to indicate their preference, and then an adult helped them to transition to the activity. And prompting needed for the first 3 steps of the play activity was recorded. Data was collected during large group, small group play, and one-on-one teacher time, and was collected during 1 activity per day. Prompting levels ranged from independent to full physical prompting and included verbal, gestural, and light physical prompting. We can see the rubric here. So the most prompting got the least amount of points. The least amount of prompting got the most amount of points on the rubric. And the level of prompting indicated the need of prompting for participation, not for accuracy. To analyze data, I used individual student data by total points on the rubric and graphed that. Then group data was averaged and graphed by taking the average of the points earned on a rubric for each day and then graphing the group average. A paired samples t-test was also performed on the students' average baseline and intervention scores, and descriptive statistics were calculated. Data was analyzed by the classroom teacher, myself, by looking at individual student graphs and the group graph throughout treatment. The results showed that most student scores on the prompting rubric showed positive correlation with the intervention of the object schedule in comparison with baseline scores, but not all of these results were statistically significant. I did a paired samples t-test with a confidence interval of 95% using the mean of each student's baseline and intervention scores. The t-score of 6.831 was above the upper bound for the test, which was 3.178. This means that the scores were statistically significant and tactile schedules did significantly increase the average score of students on the participation rubric. Cohen's D was also calculated, and it showed that student scores during intervention increased 2.789 standard deviations from the baseline. And the p-value of 0.001 for both the t-test and Cohen's D shows us that these results were statistically significant, and we can reject the null hypothesis, which was that tactile schedules have no impact on student independence during classroom routines. Descriptive statistics showed that a higher mean score during intervention was obtained compared to the baseline mean score, which goes along with the previous data that Cohen's D showed that scores increased 2.789 standard deviations during the intervention phase. When analyzed by individual activity type, each activity group had higher average scores during intervention, but when t-tests were performed, none of these t-scores had scores outside the confidence interval, so none of them were statistically significant, although there was an increase. I also got Pearson correlations, and the Pearson correlations for individual student scores showed that all participants had positive correlations between day of intervention and the rubric score. And p-scores for these correlations show that some of them were significant, but not all. It did show that the 3 highest correlation scores were the ones that were statistically significant. These are the correlation plots for individual students. The day of intervention was positively correlated for the average scores on the rubric, and the p-score did determine average daily scores to be significant. As you can see in the graph, those do follow a clearer pattern of correlation. These statistics taken together suggest that an object schedule had a positive effect on student scores on the classroom independence rubric, but not all of these results show significant increases for all students. So it was effective for some students, but was minimally effective or not effective for some students. The hypothesis of the research was that tactile schedules would have a positive effect on student scores on the classroom independence rubric. Results did show that the day of intervention was positively correlated with rubric scores, but not all of those results were significant. Throughout the intervention, student scores on the classroom participation rubric did generally increase, and mean scores were significantly higher than mean scores before intervention, and each activity type showed increases in mean scores, but those were not statistically significant. All participants had positive correlations, but only 3 out of the 5 of those correlations were significant. So this shows us that 3 of the 5 students did significantly benefit from the use of a tactile schedule, but 2 out of 5 either had a small positive effect or no effect from the tactile schedule. But even small increases in classroom independence can have huge implications for students who have very little independence to start with. And something that I found that was interesting was that the significance of this data tended to depend on how it was organized. Some ways I organized the data, it showed it was statistically significant. Other ways, it showed it was not statistically significant. So to me, this signifies the need for more research. The results are consistent with findings of previous research that tangible symbols can be effective for students. And they do add to it in the way that it shows that they could be effective for students with disabilities regardless of their vision status. There were limitations to this research, the foremost being that because of passage of time and repetition of daily routines, students may have just made progress anyway regardless of the treatment. This could be lessened in replication if maybe the intervention was done later in the year. I did this at the very beginning of the school year. Another issue was interrated reliability. Several classroom staff collected data and they were trained on data collection, but interrated reliability was never calculated. Sample size may also be an issue just because I had a small class, and it's something that really couldn't be helped, but it could be helped in the future by maybe carrying out the intervention in multiple classes. Another possible issue is limited generalizability. The target population is super small because the number of students with severe and profound disabilities is a pretty small number, but it could still be generalized to older students with multiple disabilities. The implications are that object schedules could be a good intervention for students with severe and profound disabilities if they are having issues with classroom independence, and that this is something we should consider for these students. Implications for further research show that we should investigate how these findings impact a broader student population, and research needs to be replicated to determine the efficacy of this intervention on a broader scale. It would be helpful to replicate this research with older students and with more participants to indicate if this research has broader generalizability. The conclusion that we can gain from this research is that more than half of students significantly benefited from the use of a tactile schedule, and they did show greater independence during classroom routines. This suggests that they could be of benefit to some students with multiple disabilities, regardless of visual impairment. And here are my references. Thank you for your time and your participation. I look forward to hearing your questions.